Finance First Review 2016-17 budget. Administration will update the board on the development of the district's 2016-17 budget, including a first review of the proposed budget. This item provides an opportunity for the board's information and discussion.
Welcome.
Thank you. President Logan, Vice President Fuller, Superintendent Allison, members of the board. It pleases me to sit in front of you as the CFO for the last time. That probably didn't come out quite right. And it's especially pleases me that I'm actually not going to give much of this presentation. So, you know, I feel like throwing the person into the fire right away. So Susan is actually going to do most of the presentation, and I'll fill in what I'll be the comment on the side, more or less. But to get things started, I want to comment on a couple of things. We went through for the last 6-7 months some pretty awful discussions, and the result is a budget that it really is hard to see all that work in the budget, because I'll remind you that we started off by looking at some pretty good sized fixed costs that we were going to have to address. So we addressed those through making reductions in budgets and doing a lot of things to balance that budget. So in essence, you're going to see the same, pretty much the same dollar amount, the same budget that you had last year. You know, with some little differences here and there and that sort of thing. But we'll point out a couple of things where you will see where some of those reductions did take place. But for the most part, this is a flat budget, and we had to do it that way because we had no additional new funding. Now we do have a little bit more funding in capital outlay, and we'll talk about that when we get down to that. So as we look at these numbers, I want to, and I'll probably say this more than one time, the numbers that you're going to see tonight will change. Okay, these are still estimates. We're at the 100,000 foot view of this right now, and we're getting the detail into the state budget forms, and until we get it all there, some of the final detail won't show up as well. So this is a pretty high level view, and the budget numbers you'll see tonight are based on what we have in our Hyperion budgeting system, okay? And the mill levies that you'll see, quite frankly, are the calculations that I have done, and I'm pretty sure they will change because there's some factors that I couldn't put into that as we move forward, but it's going to be pretty close. So the numbers that we'll look at probably will change, not significantly, and if they do, we'll have an explanation as to why. So with that being said, I will turn it over to Mrs. Willis, and she will move ahead.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say I'm very grateful for the opportunity to serve both the students and the staff of Wichita Public Schools. I appreciate the vote of confidence shared by Superintendent Allison and Mr. Freeman at the last board meeting. I guess my presence here indicates I haven't been scared away yet. I'd like to say I'm in the honeymoon phase, but I haven't even walked down the aisle yet. So, but that being said, I think I'm up for the challenge, so I'd like to go ahead and start walking us through this first review of our fiscal year 2017 budget report. And if we start by looking at our mill levy estimates, we can see that our general fund mill levy is set at the 20 mill level. This is set by statute under the block grant, so we do not anticipate, nor can we make a change for fiscal year 2017. The local option budget mill levy, you can see a decrease is estimated at 1.665 mills. This is a result of the increase of equalization state aid as decided by the legislature in June. As we discussed at last week's board meeting, the overall legal max spending in the local option budget is set. So when we have this increase of state aid, we have to reduce the property taxes. So that's why you're seeing this decrease in this mill levy. Capital outlay is at 8 mills. It's been at 8 mills for basically the past 2 years. That's where it's capped, will remain at 8 mills. Bond and interest, we anticipate a slight decrease in the bond and interest mill levy. The special assessment is the mill levy to cover the water, sewer, and roads at the new Southeast High School. We feel we have assessed enough tax to cover that liability, so going into the next fiscal year, we will be taking that to 0. Mr. Freeman, did I cover everything you needed to cover on the mill levy?
I'm liking this.
Okay, so that's kind of...
So am I. We get a new CFO, and we can reduce taxes by 2
There we
mills.
go. You know, there's pluses for everybody.
So overall, we are looking at a 2.02 mill levy decrease. For the typical homeowner of property valued at about $100,000, that'd be $23 annually savings. Okay. Okay, so what does that mean for us looking at our fiscal year 17 expenditures? If we start with our general fund, this is probably one of the biggest changes we've seen as far as how money will be flowing through. Last year, our general fund was set at almost $427 million. This year, we're going to be at $371 million. This is a $55.5 million decrease because of how capital outlay and the local option budget will be given to us. Last year, it had to flow through the general fund first. For fiscal year 17, it will not need to do that. So those funds will be directly put into those particular funds. Otherwise, it's, for the most part, flat. There's a little bit of weighted money there, but for the most part, it's flat. The local option budget, $111 million last year, $111 million this year. That's set by statute, so no change there. Bilingual, basically flat. Virtual, we have an increase here of almost $500,000. This fund is increased primarily because we anticipate more students in the virtual program, and we do get a little bit more funding for virtual students. We get $5,000 per FTE, and we're anticipating about a 70 student increase at this point.
And the other piece of this, part of the budget changes that we made was to outsource our learning centers, our Town East, Town West learning centers, and they will be handled by South Central Kansas Educational Service Center in the virtual model. So those 2 learning centers will be totally funded. They'll be self-supporting through the virtual funding that comes along with those. So that's part of that increase as well. Okay,
moving on to capital outlay. You'll see this year's estimated expenditures sitting at around $39 million. This is an increase of $5.183 million, and this is due to state aid equalization. We do look at this as basically one-time money, since we don't know what the school finance formulas will do next year. We don't know that we're going to sustain this level of authority. We have put it in the budget so that it can be spent. Latchkey, slight increase in latchkey. We're basically budgeting the full cash in order to avoid having to republish the budget. Food service, a slight decrease of around $800,000, but we do feel that should cover any changes in food pricing going into that fiscal year. Professional development is down around $400,000, a little bit less than that. This is primarily an area that we saw some of the cuts back in the spring developmental process. So that's why we see a decrease in this particular fund. Moving on to parent education, a decrease of around $133,000 here. This is all outside funding, so this isn't anything that we're cutting. This is just a decrease in revenue coming into this fund. Summer school funding, flat. Special education remains flat at $110 million. And vocational education, essentially flat at $9.7 million. Okay, special liability fund. This is our environmental remediation fund. We do anticipate a decrease in this fund by about $340,000. This is basically budgeting all the cash that we have left in the fund from a tax levy back in 2005, 2006. We are seeing some decreases in the costs. Some costs are dropping, so we believe that we have enough money in this fund to cover expenses for a period of time. The federal funds and the gifts and grants, there's fluctuations in these funds. This is our best estimate at this point in time. If we would receive more federal funds or more gifts and grants, we do not have to republish. So if we get those funds, we will be able to spend those funds. The at-risk 4-year-old fund, we do anticipate, when we worked on the budget over the weekend, we were at about $4.5 million for fiscal year 17. But just this morning, we learned of some possible program changes related to increases in enrollment in the at-risk and special ed pre-K. So we do anticipate this is a number that will change and go up slightly before you see it again. At-risk K through 12 will decrease $2.7 million. This is another fund that we made cuts to as part of the spring budget development process, and those changes are reflected in this fund. Capers reflects 4 payments at around $39 million. We talked a little bit last time about the missing Capers payment. We did learn from KSD that we are not to budget that missing Capers payment. They don't anticipate us actually even getting the funds or even looking at any money on that until 6/30 of 18. So we are budgeting just the 4 payments. Bond and interest, you'll see a significant change here, but the primary reason for that is for fiscal year 16, we did republish bond and interest because we refinanced $43 million in bonds. So that fiscal year 16 number is inflated, but the original budget was $44.6 million, so we're right in line going into next year. And I think that's it for the details. So I'm going to let Mr. Freeman do the summary.
And again, these are estimates, and we've already mentioned some of them will change as we build this on out. We think we're very, very close, so I don't anticipate a lot of changes, but I hope we don't have any more surprises that come at us. But and when you start to look at totals, would also indicate that what you'll see in 2 weeks, there'll be more funds that you'll see numbers to, but they're what we call unbudgeted funds. The textbook fund and some of the activity fund and some of those don't have budgeted expenditures. They're cash, basically cash funds, so they don't have a budget number, but you'll see those, that information, how much we spent last year and that sort of thing. So and you're always looking at, okay, how big is the budget? And I'd always put these numbers on here because on the notice of hearing, it will give you a total of budgeted funds. It looks just astronomical, as you can see here, $886 million. But that's counting expenditures twice, because we have in the general fund and the LOB, we budget transfers that appear as an expenditure in that fund that actually provides the revenue for all of the rest of our weighted funds. So yeah, that's why the transfers are taken off of here. So when you get down to the net expenditures in the funds, that really is a true representation of budget to budget. And again, the last year's $695.5 million budget includes $43 million of bond refinancing that wasn't there at the beginning of the fiscal year, and it won't be, and well, I don't think it'll be in next fiscal year. So when you look at and really compare budget to budget, last year's budget would have been $652.5 million without that bond refinancing, compared to $658.5. So very close. And if you think about, well, we got about $5 million of additional state aid and capital outlay, that kind of accounts for it as well. So there's lots of ups and downs, and look at those budget numbers, but basically, a $5-6 million swing out of a $650 million budget is pretty flat. It doesn't get a whole lot, whole lot flatter than that. So, and it would also indicate too that because of the types of reductions that we made in the budget to balance the budget, last year was a tight budget year. The coming year will also be a very tight budget year in terms of managing that budget. So there'll be some challenges that Susan and everyone else gets to deal with in terms of making sure we're there. So the budget timeline, as I indicated, tonight's a first review, which you've just seen. In 2 weeks, on August the 8th, will be the second review, but actually you'll see the full budget, and we will give to you, or Susan and Dee will give to you, the notice of hearing to approve that will establish two things. Once you approve the notice of hearing and it hits the newspaper, that establishes the hearing date, but it also establishes the maximum amount the budget can be. Okay, so once it's in the newspaper, you can't take it higher, but you can lower it at the budget hearing and budget adoption if you choose to do so. And we're proposing to do that on August 22nd. By statute, you're required to have the budget approved, adopted, and to the county by August 25th. So that's the timeline that kind of goes along with that. Questions?
Okay, I'm not seeing any coming up on the queue. I do have a couple of questions. One is on the vocational ed changes. This, I am assuming, takes into account all the changes that we're doing at the New Southeast, because we have a pretty extensive program out there.
It does. We actually, we looked at that, in fact, today, a little bit before we came over. We had some turnover savings because we had some retirees going out of that vocational fund. So, yes, it does include the Southeast teachers that we're hiring.
I assumed that it did. My next question is, I just need a bit of clarification on CAPERS, because you referred to the CAPERS piece as we get 4 payments, and then you talked about the missing payment that we might not get until the 18th. Is that one of the 4, or is there a 5th that we haven't gotten?
The payment that we missed was actually the 4th quarter of last fiscal year.
Okay, so it shows up in last year's.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, and what you see here as the budget, the $38.9 million, that actually includes that payment, because that's how we budgeted it. Okay, so when you look at actual expenditures, we were short about $8-9 million in the CAPERS actual receipt and expenditures. And through legislative action, they indicated they would, in years past, when they did that, you got 5 payments the next year. They don't have the money to do that in this next fiscal year, so they have put it off. And I believe the statute indicates that if they don't repay it by June 30th of 2018, it becomes a demand transfer, which means that they can't do anything with it. It's automatically transferred to CAPERS from somewhere, out of the state general fund. The caveat to that is that in that statute, they also have to pay interest on that payment that they are not making at the established rate that CAPERS pays interest in all the contributions. And at our budget workshop, Dale Dennis reported that amounts to being approximately $20,000 a day in interest charges that they're racking up until they pay this back. So, yeah. Anyway, so what we have to do, and the way that this budget number comes about, is in our budget documents, KSDE tells us what our commitment was or what our expenditure was for last year, and they include the fourth payment there. And then they automatically increase that by a percentage, and then they ask us to increase it again by a percentage so that it inflates that number enough to cover staff increases, salary increases, and the state contribution rate change. But The state contribution rate change for this coming year doesn't change, but they are budgeting as if it were. So that the $39 million you see here is basically a 3% increase over what the state tells us they think we are going to need through our salaries. But it's all calculated on salaries.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. We sent the money to the state, the CAPERS money that we had collected from, correct?
Well, this is the one this is the money that CAPERS sends to us and we send right back.
That's right.
Yeah, yes,
So we've sent it right back?
yes, yep.
All right.
Usually takes about 30 seconds.
I know, it's quick.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So we're hoping that we get 5 payments this next year.
No, well, they'll just give us 4. They don't have enough money, not this fiscal year. They're going to have to come up, find some more revenue in the state general fund to have enough money to pay that 4th amount, and they don't anticipate having it this fiscal year. So it'll go at least another fiscal year before that money gets paid back.
And then it has to be with interest from the state.
Yes.
All right. Robbing Peter to pay Paul. Thank you very
Yep.
much. Lynn?
But I was just going to add, I think they're hopeful that it'll be there for 2018. I mean, that's unsure of, too, with what their estimates are for the fiscal
Yep.
years.
Yep.
I'm seeing no other questions. Welcome, Susan. We're very happy to have you on board. Thank you so very much. And your first presentation is done. You can breathe a sigh now.
Yay.
Yeah, and very few questions. Huh?
And Mr. Freeman, thank you so much. You have taken us to a new level as far as presentations so that we can understand the work that's happening with the budget. And I think I can speak for all the board members. We all know that if we have a question, we can call you and you'll give us an answer that we can understand. So we will miss you. Thank you
thank you.
very much.
Susan will do just as good a job, if not better. I'm absolutely sure.
I have every confidence in her, but we'll miss you too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item, Mike.